I won't forget the men who died, who gave that right to me, and I gladly stand up next to you and defend her still today, 'cause there ain't no doubt.
Thank you very much.
This land. God bless.
Thank you so much. Nice to see you all. What Sandy did not say is that I have lived 1/3 of the history of our country. Which tells you what a young country it is. Or what an old man I am. Well, I am so pleased to be here, and Sandy, thank you for the moderately good introduction. George and Gavin and all the members of the President's Council, thank you so much for supporting this important institution. We appreciate it. I'm a supporter myself, so I thank you. As Sandy said, I've been traveling around talking about this book, Rumsfeld's Rules, and I might just take a few minutes. I'm told that you're ready to ask some questions, and I will answer the questions I know the answers to, and I will respond to the others. But before I do, just a few words about this book. I spent 4 years writing my memoir, Rumsfeld's Rules, Unknown and Unknown, and as I did that, I kept thinking about Rumsfeld's Rules and decided that I should do that. It started because my mother was a school teacher, and I would ask her what a word meant, and she would tell me to look it up and write it down. And I started carrying little 3x5 cards like this, and I still do to this day. And she said, well, then at the end of the week, read them and remind yourself what they mean. And then I started writing down thoughts or ideas or things that I thought were important. And I did that as a young man, as a Boy Scout. I did it as a Navy pilot. I did it when I was in Congress. And then, as Sandy said, I resigned from Congress in 1969 in my 4th term and went into the Nixon cabinet and served in the Office of Economic Opportunity, and I was my first executive job, and I started making notes about that. And then when President Ford came in, he called me back to chair his transition. I was ambassador to NATO at the time, and I came back, and then I served as his White House chief of staff, and one day we were in the Oval Office, and I mentioned one of these rules, and he said, well, what's that? And I told him, I said, well, he'd been a legislator. He'd never served in an executive position. And I told him that I keep those kinds of little rules. And I don't know what I'd said to him, maybe something like, the staff should not say the White House is calling. Buildings can't call. And so he said, well, let me see this. And so I had it typed up, and I showed it to him, and he said, you should circulate that to the senior staff in the White House. I did, and it ended up, he named it Rumsfeld's Rules. It ended up gaining a life of its own, and New York Times wrote about it in the Wall Street Journal, and people have been reading it for now, a quarter of a century, I guess. And but I decided to write a book about the rules, and that is what is now just come out last Tuesday. I tried to write it in a way that it would be interesting to college graduates who are starting at the very beginning, to people who are in the middle, and we had to have meetings. I have a chapter on how about meetings and that type of thing. I have a chapter on wrestling, because I wrestled for 10 years, and that's where you learn the relationship between effort and results, and it's terribly important. The other thing you learn is to try to put yourself in the other fellow's shoes and see what the world might look like from their perspective, and that's useful in negotiations as well. I then spent time in business and learned rules like A's hire A's, B's hire C's. And it's true. one time my daughter said to me, gee, Dad, what do you think, she's graduating from college, she said, what do you think I ought to do, and what company should I go to, or what business, or what state, and I said, you're asking all the wrong questions. The real question is, who are you going to work around? Find someone really bright, really sparkly, because you'll find the people around them will be sparkly and you'll learn a lot. She said, well, what would I do? It doesn't matter what you do. Be around those people. And she said, well, like who? And the first names that came to my mind, one was Dr. Herman Kahn, who was a futurist, who I happen to know and was an interesting fellow. He's long since gone. And another was William Buckley, I said, just because he was so intelligent and interesting as a person. But I proceeded to make other chapters, and towards the end, as I was finishing the book, I thought about the fact that American business does not defend the capitalist system very well. And I saw this Occupy Wall Street and Occupy everything, and people sleeping out in the parks and tents, and I listened to the national campaign, and I heard people talking about government growing jobs. And it reminded me of one of my rules that Washington, D.C. is 60 square miles surrounded by reality. The chapter on capitalism I wrote because I was worried that people in business, first of all, there are very few people in government ever been in business because it's hard. I mean, it's easy for an academic to go into business. They can leave and come back to their world. It's easy for a lawyer to go into government and then come out. It's very hard for a business person. If they're a small business person, it's their business, and they have to be there. If they're in a larger corporation, they get knocked off the ladder, and they're out. And it's very hard to re-enter. And as a result, you have people in business who don't, who think, I'll admit it, confession's good for the soul, my wife tells me, but if you're in government looking at business, you understand it intellectually, but it's one-dimensionally. You don't have any idea what delay does, if you're in government, what government delay does to business. You don't have any idea what uncertainty does to business. You don't really feel the impact of the regulations. I send my taxes in every year, and I always add a letter, to whom it may concern. Here are my taxes. I want you to know I haven't the vaguest idea if they're accurate. I said I went to college. You know, I've got average intelligence, and my wife went to college, and she won't even read them because she knows she doesn't understand them. And I just want you to know that that's the case, and I pay money to an accountant, and he helps me, and I hope they're right. And if you got a question, just give us a call. But can you imagine this country with a lousy tax system like that? It's inexcusable. How many people here understand their taxes? Let's see. I don't see many hands going up. But I wrote the chapter because I felt that I was in business. And I know that a businessman in a large company, has shareholders, they have customers, and they have employees. And their shareholders, customers, and employees are all across the spectrum in political views and ideas and parties. And therefore, business people are very reluctant to challenge the government, to criticize the government. They don't want to divide their stockholders or their employees or their shareholders. They also worry about the IRS. They worry. Well, if you don't understand your taxes, you ought to worry. I worry. I mean, I know I don't know. And they also, if you're in the pharmaceutical business like I was, you've got the Food and Drug Administration, and they all have the Securities and Exchange Commission and all these alphabet regulatory organizations. And to the extent someone criticizes the government or challenges an approach they're taking, they worry that the government could be turned on them. And